All right. Hey guys, everyone has been, listening to everything around how do you set up your landing pages, your email campaigns, automations, right? And also run bunch of those creative ad campaigns with your influencers. And everybody is gearing up, I'm sure, for the BF season, the Black Friday, Cyber Monday season coming up. We're all excited. I think Q4 is the time where we in e-commerce are the most excited and also the most scared, right? Because in the end, you're expecting all those green signals and revenue numbers coming in, but there are hiccups on the way. You need to be aware of it. And that's where I think I have today the best person to be able to give you all that knowledge. We have Ben Dutter, who's the SVP of Power Digital Marketing. He has been there primarily working with hundreds of brands around the strategy. How do you look about, scaling to not just 20 mil? He has worked with huge ad budgets. I'm talking about like hundreds of millions of dollars. And Ben sits with a ton of knowledge of doing acquisition and then overall strategy. And today is going to be an exciting session where we want to be deep diving on, how do you approach your acquisition? How do you approach your media buying? How do you approach all of those aspects? How do you approach setting your system up, your entire team, resources, your media channels, campaigns up, leading up to BFCM so that you are setting yourself up for less uncertainty, going to BFCM. And that's all everyone wants. So Ben, thank you so much for coming today to the podcast. Would love to a bit know more about you and how you've been, last 3 years primarily, where things have been rolled out. There's a lot of changes which has happened in the marketing world. So what's going on in your world?
Yeah, thanks for having me and looking forward to the conversation. Yeah, I think with iOS 14, it's been a common talk point now, but it shook a lot of the industry up, and somewhat of a less hot take than it used to be. But my take on it is that it didn't actually affect performance that much. It just affected measurement and the data signals that were coming back to acquisition channels. And so the last few years has been a time of, obviously with COVID and the surge in e-commerce is kind of happening simultaneously with that. We're seeing a lot of shifts in marketing. We're seeing a lot of shifts in consumer behavior, how brands can acquire those customers, et cetera. And so, my position is that the fundamentals still apply, and having good P&L, profitability, having good product market fit, understanding who your customer is, and speaking to them in a messaging context that excites them. That's really all you need to be successful in marketing up to a point. Once you're, $100 million in revenue, then you probably need to get a lot more sophisticated. But I work with a lot of brands that are in the $5 million to $10 million space. And that's really all they need to grow their business up to 10, 20, $30 million.
Right. So I think, you say it right? So when you want to get to $10 million, there's only simple decisions you need to make. You need to go to fundamentals. You need to run few things and really go deep and make it big in that, and you'll get there, right? Like eventually, if you get speed, if you have the right team, selling the right product at the right price, making sure your AOE and, AOE CAC and your return rate is good, I think you're going to get there. Right. So, but moving on, right? So when somebody comes to a decision that, hey, we've had a good run until now, but what got us here is not gonna get us to the next goal or milestone that we have, is to primarily, let's talk about the X factors that we get into the table, right? That, hey, okay, we had this bunch of experiments done. We had all of this stuff worked out for us. We know what's gonna get us to 10. But what's going to get us to 20 or 30, right, changes, and somebody needs to sit there, make these decisions in terms of budgets, make these decisions in terms of like channels, make these decisions in terms of like entire business, right? So when it comes to starting with, primarily how do you get new customers and then, eventually get to purchase, right? So in that journey, how does somebody go about making this decision that, hey, okay, we raised some more money, so quite good. So we have the budget we have money in the bank, but now how do we put this money, right? And especially where if I'm having a product which I'm having, frequent sales throughout the year, but I'm that kind of a product where mostly people are going to buy during the holiday season. How do we go up getting up to that? Is something we would love to know.
Yeah, for sure. As a business matures, usually past that, $10 million point, and as they get bigger and bigger, it's more important for them to look at the relationship between the lifetime value that they get from their customer and the cost to acquire their customer. And many brands I work with, even up to 50 or $100 million in revenue, they don't have a very good view into the LTV of their customer or the CAC of their customer or that relationship. And taking it a step further, understanding what the actual profit is, the lifetime profit per customer, and the cost to acquire them is even more important, especially in a promo heavy season like BFCM, where you don't want to over increase your expenses on the CAC side. And you also don't want to overemphasize promos because then you wash away all the profit that you would get from your customer. And so the businesses that I see that are able to scale the most successfully, they have a really good relationship between their lifetime revenue and their customer acquisition cost. And that's generally driven from more so the business model than anything. If you are a business model where you have a single purchase type product, like you're a one SKU business model, and your customer buys it, even if they're very, very happy with that thing, the chances that they come back and buy 2 or 3 or 4 times in a year are slim. And so you need to have a way to either have new product development, or the product needs to be semi-consumable or tied to some sort of seasonality in order for people to come back and buy. And so I know you talk a lot about with your listeners around retention, and it's sort of a circular answer, but the ability to retain and get repeat purchases from a single customer is really what allows you to scale, because the higher your lifetime value per customer, the higher you can spend to acquire that customer while maintaining profitability. And that allows you to compete in the crowded market space, especially around BFCM. And that is what helps you to scale. So I guess just to recap that, is really truly understand what your lifetime revenue is per customer. And I usually look at it by a 90-day window and a 1-year window. Those two seem to be the most common useful metrics. And then really truly track what your customer acquisition cost is on a profit basis or a margin basis. So that way you can determine, am I profitable per customer? How much of a promo can I discount? And, what is my strategy in order to scale? So that to me is really the breaking point of, say you're a $25 million a year business and you want to get to 40, knowing those numbers helps dictate the strategy.
With one or few SKUs, I guess the strategy works. But let's say you're bringing a new product into the game and you're like innovating, you're actually getting all those post-purchase surveys done and understanding what more my customers want. When you're going to the market with a new product, eventually you're going at, hey, is my existing customers going to buy it? And I want to make sure that this new customer is also biting in. So with that in point, right, most of the marketers will want to go back, right, and acquire more people to bite. And eventually they have to make more media decision. May not be that channel that they invested in to make it work first time is not going to work next time. And eventually what you'll have to do is you'll have to either optimize and allocate more to newer channels. So what are the new ways that you think, like, especially digital marketers are looking at that? Because there is a huge gap, as you said in the beginning, right? Like that, what is reported in, let's say, Facebook or TikTok or Meta is not really tying up to my post-purchase surveys. And there is a bit of a lack on how people are approaching, doing this, right? So what are some of the things that you feel that folks should start doing, to get their new product into the eyeballs of new customers and eventually get them to be repeat buyers as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the theme, I guess, of our conversation today, it sounds like it's going to be know your customer. If you know your customer's unit economics well, like what we just touched on, then that helps support how much to invest. But then you need to know what your customer cares about, and that helps dictate what future products are. Those products need to solve a problem or be satisfying to your customer. So that's kind of step one. But then on the media acquisition side, if you understand your customer well, then you also understand how they spend their free time. So what channels they're on, what kind of things grab their attention, as well as what kind of creative or messaging resonates with that customer. And creative, I've seen, is probably the single biggest lever that we have in marketing to be impactful or ineffective. So if you have a really powerful creative that really tightly resonates with your target audience and aligns with your product and your whole business model, and all those things are kind of moving in harmony, then you're able to scale even on mature channels very, very well, up to easily millions of dollars of spend on a single channel if all that is firing well. But let's say that you've hit a plateau of diminishing returns and you really can't scale anymore on whatever channel you started off on, or first two you started off on, and you need to expand. If you know your customer well, and there's a few ways to do this, and I'll break that down, then you kind of know what the next channel is or the next way to reach them. So generally, there's a few ways. One is if you're doing post-purchase surveys or pre-purchase surveys, you have some understanding around your customer, around the things that they care about. You might also, as a part of that survey, depending on the business model, if you have more of a quiz type business model where maybe it's something like hair care or skincare, or maybe you have a lot of SKUs around clothing or something, and you're asking them about their age or their demographic or their body type, you start to understand a bit from that zero-party data, that survey response data, of who your customer is. So that's one way. Another way is to use a third-party tool. So there's a number of tools out there where you can create a persona within that tool and then query the tool's database to say, okay, where does this persona spend their time? The one that I recommend is a tool called Global Web Index, or GWI. And that it's not cheap, but it's oftentimes worth it to do it, because they have a lot of information around where people spend their time on channels. The other way is to just get on the phone with a customer, randomly call a couple of customers or email a couple of customers, give them a gift card, say, hey, I have a 2-question survey. I'll give you a $100 gift card. Can I talk to you for 5 minutes? And just kind of subjectively, qualitatively understand who your customer is. It's sort of an impromptu focus group, for lack of a better term, and do that 10, 20 times, and you'll have a decent picture of where to go. And so, for example, if your business is a fast fashion brand that caters to younger women, we probably have a pretty good idea of where that audience is going to be spending their time, right? They're going to be on Instagram. They're probably going to be on TikTok, probably going to be a little bit on YouTube, probably going to be a little bit on Pinterest, maybe Snapchat. Like there's sort of a stereotype, but there are stereotypes for a reason around. You start to understand who this person is. But then if you get on the phone with some of those customers and come to find out that who you thought your customer was is actually not your customer, maybe your actual customer is a middle-aged woman, and their media consumption behavior is very different than a Gen Z woman. And so maybe they are on Meta, but maybe they're less so on Instagram. Maybe they're more on YouTube than they are on TikTok, et cetera. And so really understanding your customer helps inform where your next move from a channel basis stands.
When it comes to like when you have like a lot of customers, knocking your doors, see, having to do that with less set of customers kind of makes sense. And then, but when this whole pile of customers become larger, and then you have like so many arrays of people coming in, that's where I think most of the marketers eventually, as they grow, find this problem, right? In terms of like, how do I tie up different cohorts of customers in, and then a lot of data coming in from GA4 or Facebook or all of this are skewed enough. Who do I trust here, right? Like it's becoming a problem every now and then, because we have seen identity losses happening. We're seeing cookie depreciations coming forward, right? And like eventually, retention marketers are working hard, but acquisition marketers still want to prove what they've got to prove, right, in order to get new people knocking on their door. So how does, let's say, the guy who's doing acquisition like solve this problem moving forward?
Yeah, so I think there's two pieces to that. One is you want to make sure that your data is as accurate and directional as possible. So using Facebook's audience insights tool, using GA4's demographics tab, some of those things, I would say they're not completely wrong, but I would put them low on the list of areas I would go to first. I would prefer to go through surveys or through a neutral third-party tool rather than a tool that has sort of a vested interest in grading its own homework. Like Google and Facebook want to demonstrate some value to their customers. So powerful platforms, but just be careful with that. So that's one thing, set that aside. But to your question, I think it's more around validation of the impact, measurement, and how is this successful. Say we've identified that we want to test into TikTok, right? So we're going to run a TikTok channel test. Well, how do you actually do that from an acquisition perspective to prove to your retention team, to prove to your CFO, to prove to, the board or whatever kind of stakeholders you have that this was worth the money? And the traditional last 12, 15 years answer was, well, we're going to look at our attribution tool and we're going to see, oh yeah, our ROAS was really good or our CPA was really low. And that was enough. And so you can say, okay, great, we're going to continue to push. My argument is that even when that was quote unquote working prior to iOS 14.5, it still was often very flawed because there is very limited ways that marketers could track users accurately. And just because something was trackable back before iOS 14 doesn't mean that it actually caused that behavior. So for me, I'm big on measurement and on incrementality, which is just a fancy word for, net new growth, right? Things that actually were caused by marketing rather than just, trackable by some sort of software. And so for TikTok example, what we do a lot at Power Digital, the agency I work for, is we will do a concentrated market test. So we call it a growth matched market test. And the beauty of this is this actually goes back 70 odd years to old school radio and TV and out of home buying. So it's a very established, mature process to prove the ROI of marketing. And you find a market that is representative of your business and you run TikTok in this example, just in that market. Now, the benefit of doing it that way is that you don't have to spend as much money as you would have to spend in a national program. And what I see the mistake a lot of brands make is they say, yeah, we're going to throw 25 grand at TikTok and run it as a national program. We're going to mirror our meta structure, conversion optimized, broad targeting, 25 grand. Let's see what it says. And invariably it comes back with terrible results because TikTok is really not like Meta in that it's not a shopping experience yet. I know they're trying to make it that way. It's not really a shopping browsing experience. It's an entertainment vehicle. It's more like television. And so it has to be kind of bought like television in that people need to see the ad multiple times and it needs to feel like content that's entertainment rather than a sales pitch to them. And because of that, you need to have a higher reach and frequency in order for it to make an impact. So a bigger share of audience messaged more often and doing it at a market level. Like say I just target New York City, I can spend a lot less and achieve the right amount of saturation in New York than I would if I'm trying to do that same level of saturation in terms of impressions across the whole country. Maybe, 1/100th or, 1/500th of the total volume of spend that I would need. And then I can track total sales in New York and see and trend that against the rest of the country. I'm only running TikTok in New York and I'm not running it anywhere else. And New York is suddenly hockey stick growth shooting up above the trend line compared to everybody else. That gives me and the CFO and the retention team confidence that TikTok is actually making a difference, right? And so using these alternative, more holistic measurement methods, and this is just one, will help you validate before you go all in on a channel that it is actually making an impact.
Thanks for that. This gives somebody how to tackle one channel, right? So as you grow up, right? So I think eventually moving beyond digital, right? You'll go to events. You want to like look at doing your events. You want to like connect with your customers closely there. You want to be looking at what eventually also your business models change according to how competitors are coming, right? So attention is everything, and attention can be bought, can be viewed. There's a lot of factors which go into attention, right? So when it comes to that, a lot of the founders have been telling me that they're kind of like struggling to get proper ROI out of their efforts because they're able to track, they're able to measure their digital outputs, but they're not unable to, factor in their offline outputs. They're even unable to factor in like all the branding activities that they do, right? How does that fit into the entire game? And I've seen a lot of like even people complain that, hey guys, like we invested in branding for some time, but I feel it's not working for us, right? So it's just coming out to that feeling that people get out of this, and there's no actual way of really, like showing that output. Because in the end, you're looking at it as an entire business activity, right? From running paid to your offline activity to your branding. How does somebody tie that all in? Because that's where the holistic measurement comes in. And I've been hearing a lot about marketing mix modeling and coming back into the game. And people have been talking about it. But where are we in that landscape right now? Why is it coming back? How is it really going to help the business moving forward?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think when you're a brand that's at that level of maturity where you're running distinct offline media like television or out of home, and you're running distinct branding campaign efforts, maybe you have a PR push, you're doing a lot more content and thought leadership around the space. Maybe you have a couple of, you're sort of acting as a publisher. That's a very popular tactic for that sort of mid-market size brand that's pushing from call it 30 million to 50 million. They start really producing a lot of content on their organic social channels, on their traditional channels. They release a catalog or papers or whatever, depending on what vertical you're in, right? A lot of fashion brands, which is a big industry that I work in, release their lookbooks every, so often. And they have a lot of content creators that they sponsor and influencers that they sponsor. And the measurement of all of that is very, very difficult, to your point. Absolutely, it's difficult. And I don't want anybody to think that it's easy or that there's a silver bullet answer that's just like, oh, just use this tool and it'll solve it for you. That's false. Anybody who says that is probably trying to sell you something or is not very well informed on the subject. So the reason why marketing mix modeling is becoming more popular again is because it uses data science to find causal effects. So something happened and then later it forced something else to happen in large aggregate pools of data. And historically, the skill set required to do marketing mix modeling, or MMM, sometimes media mix modeling, depending on who you ask, MMM was a data scientist who probably had a PhD, who's probably paid many hundreds of thousands of dollars a year at a big four consultancy. It would take them 6 months to do it. And it was reserved for big enterprise brands, like the Nordstroms of the world and Coca-Cola and Walmart, people like that, right? And so for most growing e-commerce brands, it was not accessible or really necessary. Now, a lot of those brands over the last 10 years have matured to that area where they are doing these initiatives, right? To your point, they're doing more comprehensive marketing. And this is where MMM can be very useful. And it's become a lot more accessible because largely driven by a few developments that have converged simultaneously. One is with the rise of machine learning and AI. has made the ability to create media mix models that are accurate and predictive much more quickly and easily. So that's number one. Number two, there's been a lot of open source push around this from various data scientists who the most famous of them is called Robin, Robyn, which was actually developed within this sort of accelerator program within Facebook, within Meta. And it's open source, so anyone has access to it, as well as, again, the push of measurement issues being so challenging on the attribution side, right? And so there's been a business need to try to solve for this or try to replace this. Now, I don't personally think that MMM can replace attribution. I think it's another parallel tool in the toolbox. I also think it needs to be calibrated and validated through experiments. So coming back to my earlier example with the TikTok experiment, you need to run scientific experiments like that and then use that data to input into your custom media mix model or marketing mix model to determine what the effect is. The benefit of it is that in theory, if you do it right, you can determine, oh, my branding efforts do have this effect. Seasonality has this effect. Promos have this effect. And you can kind of assign an ROI to all of these different contributing factors to your total marketing initiative and total business initiative. And what's surprising for many brands is the effect that marketing has often is less than they think it is. So in those models, it often comes back that marketing is less incremental than or less responsible for revenue growth than many marketers think. It's hard to look at yourself in the face and say, I made less of an impact than I thought I did. But in many cases, it's true. And it's because it's complicated, right? And so I think for me, when they start going into offline media, when they start going into brand media, the combination still of looking at business level metrics like blended P&L metrics is still absolutely important. As we increase brand spend, does it negatively affect our margin? If so, maybe it's not worth it, right? And we have to consider that. Looking at experiments, what are some experiments we can run where we're going to do a test for a specific area or a specific product line or a specific audience or a specific time period, and then see how that affects the total business. And then using modeling, like marketing mix modeling, to sort of tie it all together. And so those kinds of three things, I think, are how that diversified measurement is how smart marketers are able to feel confident in their decisions.
Thank you so much for that. I think I feel a triangulation game is coming between the three, right? And I think everybody will try to move towards that future. And when it comes to Black Friday, Sunday, Monday, right? With a lot of people doing attribution, right? And larger players, I'm sure, doing modeling in their own, teams and all that. There is definitely a lot of people who are not doing this, right? Or who are eventually doing it in some form, but they're not effectively doing this properly. And do you feel that like moving into this year's BFCM, where we are seeing a lot of concerns around, there is inflation. There is a lot of rise in CPMs and CPAs as well. How do we go about solving this problem? And eventually, throughout the next 3 months, we will see a lot of people, early starting their discount sales, flash sales, right? Their email campaigns, all of that stuff is going to be early into the game. And then they'll look for even people who spend a lot, because everybody still is scared of this entire inflation game going on. And we're seeing it happening. This is real, right? So how can MMM come into play and help this? Or how should advertisers, businesses even go and implement this year BFCM?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, right now we're at the end of September when this is being recorded. And the runway is short. There's not a ton of time left to, you really start to see it start earlier and earlier every year. And I think this year is not going to be any different. We'll probably start to see reactions in the market in early and mid-October, right? And where people are having the whole Q4 essentially is in a prolonged holiday promo period, my advice is that whatever you can use to learn retroactively from months past or years past, and that's where marketing mix modeling comes in, can help you feel more confident in a scenario plan for this year. And so an example of that could be, we're going to do a quick marketing mix model to see what the effect of diminishing returns are as we scale spend. We know we have to spend, but we don't necessarily know where the break point is, where every dollar beyond a certain threshold is more and more wasteful. And sometimes you'll call that, marginal return. And the marginal return is usually expressed as some sort of curve, right? It usually will look like a plateau or a mountain, like sort of a V shape. And a lot of these marketing mix models will spit that out, and it will tell you the optimal amount of spend during November last year was when you spent this much per day or whatever. And so then you can say, okay, I know if, let's say it's $3,000 per day on Meta, I'm just making up a number, but you know that you spent $6,000 per day on Meta. Well, that delta from 3 to 6, you probably got a much worse ROI on that chunk of the business versus the first chunk of the spend, right? And so if you're focusing on profitability, which many of my clients are this year, they're more concerned with contribution margin and profitable growth, they might take a more conservative spend level, or maybe they will try to spread that spend out. So using something like a marketing mix model to look retroactively at last year or the last 12 months of data, I think is a good starting point. If you have time and you have a fairly short consideration cycle product, so not if you're selling furniture or a car or high-tech, high AOV products, right, where people want to sit and think about it for a long time, but let's say you're selling sunglasses or clothes or shoes or something where it's more an impulse buy, I think you still in September, early October have time to run a couple of experiments where you're doing a spike in spend, you're doing a promo or a non-promo versus a certain product. You can kind of test a couple of things out and just see what the market reaction is, and that will help you make a decision into BFCM. So that's my advice to my clients right now, is learn as much as you can in September and early October so that you have a strong hypothesis and a plan moving into BFCM. One thing that's interesting that we found, especially in e-commerce brands, is that their highest value customer are customers acquired in October. And so for many of our clients, we actually encourage them to begin really ramping up acquisition spend in October, because we want, and really even September, because you want to prime the pump and then really acquire them in October. And the reason why that is that people have the highest propensity to repeat buy within 30 to 60 days of their first purchase. I don't know what it is psychologically, but I've seen that trend for the last 10 years. Probably you're in the happiness glow of, I bought this cool sweatshirt and I got it home and I love it and I want another one. I don't know why, but because of BFCM, customers coming in October, they're very, very likely to repeat buy in November as well. And so you can kind of tolerate a little bit of a higher CPA or CAC even in October and build that retention program even bigger for a bigger repeat email lifecycle push in November. So there's a few factors there, but if you don't have that data, is my point, you don't know that you can necessarily make that decision, right? So it all comes back to know your customer, have the right data, have a backwards looking view, and use that to hypothesize and plan for the season.
So this comes back to the first thing that you pointed out, that like in the end, all your own data need to fuel the other third-party systems in order to get you better customers, right? And then if you have a model which is calibrated enough to be able to make those decisions for you, then you've got a good system going on, my friend, to make those experiments and then eventually take business decisions. And this is the entire system let's shift from this funnel approach to a holistic cyclic approach of marketing. And I think that's where most of the people should move ahead. Did I make that completely right?
No, yeah, absolutely. It is a cycle, and I think the term flywheel has been kicked around for a while, which is
Mm.
fine. That the flywheel to me is more around your existing customers become evangelists for your brand, which is great. That's a great problem to have. Of course,
Mhm.
that usually connotes that your product quality is really really good. But for acquisition and retention marketers, I really view them as one unified growth team.
Mhm.
And whatever the overall business objective is, whether it's top line revenue or net revenue or contribution margin or net income, whatever your kind of financial target is, they need to work together and have the right data and the right understanding of their customer in order to make those decisions. Because if the retention side of the game is also not doing well, like let's say your repeat is poor and your LTV is poor, that's a handcuff on the acquisition team. They can't spend enough to get people out. What I've seen across the industry, the average CAC across my clientele for e-commerce is around $25 to $30, depending on the industry.
Mhm.
So if your lifetime profit per customer is less than that, you pretty much you're stuck. You pretty much can't get out. You can't buy your way out of the hole, and you have to be forced into an organic only strategy or predominantly organic strategy. So they go hand in hand. To your point, they're sort of two halves of the cycle. You need to increase your LTV and your profit margins. At the same time, you need to maximize how much you can spend on CAC in order to acquire as many customers as possible.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben. I think this has been a great session. Folks who are listening into this, there's a bunch of gold available, which you all have heard. I think go back and sit with the team and make sure the systems are set right for BFCM. Otherwise, feel free to reach out to Ben. Feel free to reach out to me, and we're there to help you out. So wherever you are, whoever is listening in, wish all the good data, wish all the good revenue, wish all the good luck for the upcoming BFCM season. Thank you so much, Ben, for tuning in today. Yeah, have a great week. Have a great night.
Thank you so much.